So it is an honour to welcome Dr. Mark Harper. Mark, would you like to give us a wave so we know who you are? The man with the books behind him. Mark and I have swam into each other at a number of different events and sat on a number of different panels about cold water swimming. But it was a real pleasure to sit down with him and have coffee shortly after his new book was published, which is called Chill, or it's back to front, Chill, the Cold Water Swim Cure. So it's out now if you haven't already got a copy. And I spoke to Mark for the October issue, which should have just hit your doormats. Oh, I've got the blur on, which is all about health. So our October issue is all about how we benefit from our outdoor swimming, and Mark and I talked about his story and his book and background. So if you haven't already read it, then this should hopefully be quite revealing. So a bit about Mark. Dr. Mark Harper is a member of the Brighton Swimming Club, so one of the oldest in the country there. He is an advisor for the Outdoor Swimming Society, director at Mental Health Swims, a consultant anaesthetist at Brighton and Sussex University Hospital. Mark accidentally, quite unrelated routes, developed an interest in the negative effects of getting cold during surgical operations and the positive effects of cold water swimming. His professional life and his PhD are based on keeping people warm. However, his research increasingly involves immersing people and himself in cold water in collaboration with the Extreme Environments Laboratory at Portsmouth University. Hello, Mark.
Hello, what a pleasure to be here.
How are you? Where are you? And where was your last swim?
Well, at the moment, I'm in Hassocks, so just outside Brighton. And unfortunately, I haven't had a swim since Monday. And I'm beginning to feel it today. So my last swim was Monday morning at Hove Beach, just a nice civilized short swim plus coffee.
Excellent. And the temperature's still kind of holding. It's quite a nice time of year for this sea, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think as we discussed before, what's our ideal temperature? And this is pretty much my ideal temperature. It's about 15, 16. It's got that bite, but you can be in for a while. You don't get too cold afterwards. It's not painful getting in. So yeah, I really like this kind of temperature. It
is the sweet spot, isn't it? And on a sunny day as well, it's even nicer. So for those who don't know a lot about your story, I thought we could start with you telling us, sort of taking it back to the beginning, about you learning to swim, living in Brighton, maybe a bit about your lifeguarding on the beach.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's it. So I grew up in Brighton. I always swam. My mum used to take me to the swimming club, but I certainly never swam in the sea, or I hardly ever swam in the sea. And in the summers, my job was lifeguarding on Hove Beach and Brighton Beach. But I rarely, if ever, I think I went in 2 or 3 times over the several summers I worked there. And so I kept swimming all the way through university as I worked here, but always just with a club in the pool. It was only when I was complaining to one of the guys I used to play water polo with as a teenager, I was complaining to him after the peer-to-peer race, which was one of my few sort of forays into the sea, that the pool was shut for 2 weeks in August. And he said, yeah, you should join the guys. Even though the club had a sea swimming section, he said, you should join the guys and go in. And I was in with them while the pool shut for the next 2 weeks. And I was as shocked as anyone else that, they swim all year, that kind of thing. I couldn't believe it. So I went in that first time and, just went for a little swim around the pier, standard swim, and thinking, okay, this will just be 2 weeks. But I remember as I walked up the beach that first time thinking, this feels a bit good. And that basically developed into nearly 20 years of doing it now. That 2 weeks has been a continuous process ever since. It was quite funny. One of the guys I talk about in the book, David, he said to me that first or second day I was there, he said, you'll soon be addicted to the cold. And he's kind of right and he's kind of wrong, because I still hate getting in. I really don't think I'm any tougher now than I was 20 years ago. But I'm addicted to the effect of the cold without a doubt. And it was kind of that. I mean, there's a longer story behind, why I came to start thinking that you might be able to use cold water swimming as a therapeutic intervention, which is basically where we are now. But a lot of it comes back to that first time I was just walking up the beach thinking, God, this feels good.
Yeah, and when we met, you talked about how Eureka isn't the most important expression in science. It's actually, that's funny.
Yeah, that's it. It was Isaac Asimov who came up with that one. And it's that funny moment where you think, and that was exactly it. I read that after that, but I still remember thinking, oh, that's funny. I mean, it's kind of exactly the phrase that I had in my head as I was walking up the beach from my first swim. And that's it. It just sort of gets you thinking, that's something that wasn't expected, and going down and continuing to explore that. And that's what brings about many or most scientific discoveries. I'm not crediting myself with a scientific discovery, by the way, but you know what I mean. It set me off on my path. It sets you off on a path of curiosity and, not invention, just discovery. That's it.
Yeah. And well, let's go on to that. Tell us a bit about how your swimming and your professional life kind of came together and kind of set you on this path.
Well, that was because, so I was researching cold water, people getting cold during surgery. When you have an operation, you lose your normal temperature regulation. Your body's temperature regulation breaks down. And so we have to do things as anaesthetist to keep patients warm, because hypothermia is bad for you. And hypothermia is always bad for you. Hypothermia, exposing yourself to cold. I mean, this is a really important point, I think. Exposing yourself to the cold is a good thing. And that's why I'm here. That's why I've written the book, basically. But actually getting cold and becoming hypothermic is always bad for you, because it stresses the body. And so like exposing yourself to cold, that's like going to the gym or doing a workout in the pool or whatever. You really push yourself. But hypothermia is when you push yourself too much and you pull a muscle or something like that. And that's the kind of comparison. So I was busy finding all these ways of stopping people getting cold during surgery and measuring their temperatures and things like this. And I started coming across these articles mainly from Mike Tipton in Portsmouth, actually, but a lot of others. We spoke about the cold stress response or the cold shock response or whatever. And what I noticed was that the stress response to cold was the same as the stress response to surgery. And this kind of makes sense, because the body's not going to develop several different types of stress responses. One to cold, and one to swimming, and one to being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. So I thought, that's interesting. But what was even more interesting was the fact that if you exposed yourself to cold on a regular basis, then this stress response was reduced. And now the problem with surgery is like the hypothermia thing. If you get really cold, it sets off too much of a stress response. And what happens is you go into what I would call the pathological or bad zone in terms of stress response. We need a stress response. It's a good thing. It's absolutely what we need in certain circumstances. But what we want to do is keep it in that physiological zone where it's good for you. And so surgery, you can become hypothermic, and that exacerbates the cold, the stress response. But there are also all kinds of other things. So while hopefully you've got a nice anaesthetist who keeps you asleep, means you don't feel anything, or you stay awake and you don't feel anything, the body is still reacting as if it does feel stuff. And so you get this massive stress response. And the bigger that stress response, the more complications you get post-operatively. So I thought, well, look, if you get used to the stress of cold and that reduces that stress response, keeps it in the good physiological zone, well, maybe we could take patients before surgery, expose them to cold water, adapt them to cold water, and then their stress response will be less, and therefore they will have less complications following surgery. So that's where they kind of came together. Unfortunately, I haven't yet had the funding to test this, but in theory, it sounds pretty good.
Yeah, and we talked about the fact that if you were going under a routine operation, that perhaps swimming in cold water on the lead up to it could be a benefit.
Absolutely, I'm convinced that it would. I mean, as to what you've got to think about here is there's a difference between statistical significance and clinical significance, and whether it had a generally clinical, overall really affected your outcome, I'm not sure, but I have no doubt at all that it will reduce your stress response to surgery. So it can only be a good thing.
Yeah, and lots of people have a consultation with an anaesthetist before they go down a route with surgery, and perhaps they can mention that they're a cold water swimmer at that point.
Yes, exactly.
And I mean, that's kind of led you to do all kinds of other work. You've been working with Mike Tipton and Heather Massey. And I was just curious, is there anything that surprised you about some of the research and things you've discovered on this path?
In terms of, it's kind of followed a very logical route. I've discovered a lot, but it's kind of followed on, one thing's followed on from another. And so it's been a really interesting thing with a lot of discoveries. I'm still learning stuff all the time, finding out stuff. But to say actual a surprise, if you told me 20 years ago, this is what I'd be finding, I would probably find it surprising. But because it's this gradual process, it hasn't been so surprising. What I would say is the best things have been, I suppose, in a way, kind of how effective it's turned out to be. I mean, we're only at the stage of doing a feasibility study at the moment. That was 59 people, but I was surprised what a big effect. I didn't explain. So this was a study using cold water swimming as a therapeutic intervention for clinical anxiety and depression. And this is Chill UK have been doing this. Guy Mike Morris, I've worked with far too many Mikes. There's one particular operation I do with two surgeons called Mike, and I work with Mike Tipton. I work with Mike Morris. It's far too many Mikes. Anyway, I swim with two Mikes as well. Anyway, but so Mike Morris runs this. We met up years ago. I tell the story of the book, but we met up, and he said, "Well, I can run these courses. You do the research." And so he put the courses together, and we took 59 people. We did a proper clinical trial saying doing questionnaires, seeing how they reacted to having a cold water swimming course. And what I was surprised was the size of the effect we saw in these people, because I was expecting an effect, but I wasn't expecting quite as big an effect as this. I think I said to you, if you saw this, if this was a drug, they wouldn't believe you that you're having that kind of clinical effect. And also, my theory had always been, from my own experience, and this is where I kind of come. I've just been lucky. I've been in the right place at the right time, because I do it myself, because I've done it. I've got the experience from working with patients during surgery and coming to meeting Mike and Tipton, that is, and all that kind of stuff. But from my own experience, I know you start it, you become addicted, you love it, and knowing lots of other people who start it, love it, and carry on doing it. But I was also surprised that it was around 80%. It was a minimum of 60% carry on doing it afterwards, and it's probably more like 80% who just carry on doing it afterwards. And again, the surprise was more my theory was borne out as well as I could have hoped in practice.
And so, I mean, I get asked it all the time. I'm sure other swimmers do too. Why does it feel so good? What is scientifically happening there for us?
You're basically doing cocaine. That's what it comes down to. Because when you go in, you just get this massive release of neuropeptides. So it's the adrenaline, it's the noradrenaline. These are particularly what are released by cocaine. But there's also, we can try and measure these things, but there's no doubt that dopamine comes out. The serotonin maybe comes out, although we're not quite sure whether serotonin really has an effect these days. It just comes together. And what is great about swimming, though, is, or cold water swimming, is all under control of the body. You put something external into it, like cocaine, it might have the same effect, but your body hasn't got a means of coping with it, so dealing with it. It's just too much for it. Whereas, because it's the internal system of the body is this kind of push me pull you system, with one thing pulling, one thing pushing. Your sugar goes up, your insulin goes up to bring it down. Your sugar goes too low, you get glucagon or adrenaline or stuff like that, and it puts it up and keeps its balance. You put something external into the system, like a massive sugary sweet, and that kind of upsets things a bit. And it's the same. You put cocaine into your body, it totally upsets the system. It depletes the whole nervous system of these chemicals. Whereas when it's your body's own reaction, it is a much more controlled thing, and the body, you don't get that same low afterwards, you just get the high and things like this. So it's, and it's being out. And I mean, I suppose you also get oxytocin as well, for being with people, because this is one of the important things. It's not just about the buzz from the cold, it's the buzz from being out with other people in nature and having all these extra effects on top of that.
Yeah. I mean, physical activity, great for our physical and mental health. Take it outside, even better. Get into cold water, even better still.
Exactly.
Yeah. And this is another question that a lot of my coaching clients ask me: why do I need a wee? I'm getting into cold water. Why do I need a wee?
Yes, well, that is because when you go into cold water, the effect of particularly the noradrenaline, that has this massive effect on the blood vessels to the skin, and they all shut down immediately. Immediately, really. And so that means that you've got a lot more, your body's pumping against a much higher resistance, and this puts the pressure in the circulation up. And one of the effects of the higher pressure in the circulation, particularly in the atrium, is it releases this hormone called atrial natriuretic peptide. And natriuretic means you excrete sodium through your kidneys, and as a consequence, you take water out through your kidneys as well. So your bladder fills up with lots of salt leaving the body to this, and water following it with this atrial natriuretic peptide.
And is that why swimmers are quite susceptible to cramp?
Well, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, it could be. It could have an effect. You do lose salt. You do lose salt as a consequence. I have no idea how much salt and whether it's clinically significant. The thing is, the body is so good at controlling these things, and there's a lot of stuff about drinking 2-3 liters of water a day. In fact, if you just drunk when you were thirsty, that you basically, unless you're doing some extreme event, that's enough, because the body's so sensitive to becoming dehydrated.
Excellent. So I mean, your book is great. I think even if you are an experienced winter swimmer or cold water swimmer, I think actually it's a really good tool to have on your bookshelf. There's lots of stuff in there that I certainly learn, and it's going to be really useful actually as I navigate things as a coach and a swim guide. But would you like to summarize it for us, just in case anyone's thinking, shall I buy it?
Well, it's in 3 sections. And so the first section is a lot of background. It is background. It's things like, what is happening to the body. It's, what is happening here, the physical sensation of water. Why do we have this physical sensation of water? So a little bit about, don't be scared by this, the chemistry and the physics of water, which I loved researching for this. I knew a bit about it, but not that much. A bit about, how we get cold, the physics of thermodynamics. So it's a lot of that kind of background, those kind of questions that you've always asked about the physics and the physiology behind the cold. The second section is some tips about how to start swimming and some background. But rather than just give the tips, I've got 6 rules of cold water swimming. Things like, know how you're going to get out before you get in, and that kind of stuff. Interestingly, as I've been talking about this a lot, I've put them down a bit more, which is to 6 words, which is not that long, not that cold, and not that often that you get most of the effect. But I've tried to expand on why these things work, why gloves and boots, and why, whether a wetsuit, whether a shower, this kind of thing. So I expand on it to give some background for people who have done a lot of swimming, that it's still interesting and there's still something to find out about it. And then the final section is just some stories, but I say just some stories. I think they're extraordinary stories. Ordinary people, ordinary lives who just got extraordinary stories, and I love doing this part of the book. There's a guy, Rob, who suffers from Crohn's. I've known for years. I've probably been swimming for 10, 11 years. I've always known that it helped with his Crohn's and stuff like this, but I didn't know the full extent of how bad his Crohn's had been before he started swimming in the sea. And the whole background to, the basic summary is that when he was 19, 20 years old, he was so ill with this, he couldn't even walk up the stairs to his parents' front door. And then last year, age 50 odd, he completed an Ironman. And I just find that extraordinary, what he's been through and what all the others have been through as well. So it's just really interesting stories for which I take zero credit. That is, these guys have shared this so openly with me and spoken so well and so eloquently about it, and have told these just lovely stories to read.
Yeah, and it's actually really great because it brings some of that science you learn at the beginning of the book kind of to life in real people's experience. We got some questions ahead of this session, and some of them are covered well in the book, but I thought we could go over them because they're sort of popular things that people ask. So the first one I want to ask is, I'm sorry, I don't know who sent what question. I've just got the questions. So on top of the additional risks associated with high blood pressure, heart conditions, is there any research suggestion we should be taking into account other factors? So other health conditions, drug use, hangovers. I mean, we can feel different. I know if I've had a lack of sleep or I haven't eaten before I get into cold water. So are there anything else we should be considering before we start cold water swimming?
Yes, but also no. So all these things are important. At the same time, if you, actually, I think a really interesting one is a lack of sleep, because our thermal regulation goes down with a lack of sleep. So what you might find is that you get cold quicker when you haven't had sleep. And it's the same if you're hungover and things like this. So while it's not necessarily a bad thing to do it, you really do need to have your wits about you and be careful when you have any additional condition. I suppose that's the thing. It's really about learning to listen to your body. And high blood pressure, it's probably, as you get used to it, it's probably not a major issue. And in fact, overall, though your blood pressure does go up when you go in the water, overall the way that the whole thing acts on your body, you'll find your blood pressure probably goes down over time. So you actually spend less time hypertensive than you would without swimming. And so a lot of it, just like with everything, like the whole thing about swimming is listening to your body. And this is where I kind of have an issue with Wim Hof, is because I find that all a bit extreme. It's all about pushing yourself to the extreme. Whereas to my mind, it's about, well, this is my forward summary: maximize it, minimize discomfort, maximize fun. It's not about pushing it. You get most of the effect just by going in for 2 or 3 minutes. You don't even have to swim. I mean, you swim it, you get exercise, that's great, but you don't have to do these extreme things. You don't have to push yourself. So as long as you're sensible and you listen to your body, and again, this comes when you've been in for a while, you've got to start learning about when to get out, when you get cold. Everyone's different. I'm not, I can't stay in for a long time at all. I don't think I stay in any longer now than I used to. When I started doing it, I don't think I've got any better at it. It doesn't matter. I don't stay in that long. But what I have learned is to listen to my body and say, okay, and I don't know how I do it, but by now I know, right, if I go in now, I'll avoid all after drop. That's fine. That would be great. So yes, so they all matter. They're probably, most of them probably aren't contraindications to swimming, but you know, they do affect it. And so you definitely take all these things into account and just always listen to your body and just learn by doing and learn by staying within your limits.
Yeah, little by little. And someone's asked, and I think this is quite an interesting one, how long do any physiological or psychological benefits last after swimming?
There are two answers to this. One is as long as you feel them, and that's certainly it. I mean, personally, I find for a day or two afterwards, for a day, I really feel the buzz for a day, particularly when it's really cold. I feel the buzz for a day. Now, there is something that there are, you know, it's a few days, basically, is what you can probably measure effects for a few days from a single swim and from the effect of putting your face in the water as well. You're having that parasympathetic effect from putting your face in the water, the rest digesting. But the interesting one, so the other one is the adaptation thing. So you've got the acute effects just going in, your body reacts, the noradrenaline, blah, blah, blah. And you've got the adaptation effect. And this is a much longer term effect. And for this, what they showed, it was Mike and his team showed that if you do 6 swims, you know, I can't remember what temperature, but it's classically between 10 and 15 degrees is what they put them through. 6 swims over, I don't know, 2-week period, something like that. And then 14 months later, and that was 14 months just when the experiment or the study stopped, you still had 60% of that adaptation there. So some of that adaptation will last, you know, a good amount, a measurable amount will last 14 months afterwards. But every single swim will, you know, give you a boost or whatever, some physiological effect in some way, which will last from hours to days.
Great, thank you. And we actually had a couple of questions on this, and actually I'm quite interested from a swim guiding perspective. So sort of a variety of ways of asking, but basically talking about swimming induced pollinary edema, so SIP. Any thoughts on how we can prevent it, recognize the signs, or practical tips for dealing with it until or if and help arrives?
Yeah. So as far as I understand, this happens mainly with people in wetsuits. And so what happens, so it's worth understanding what is happening. So you remember what I said about all the blood vessels shutting down, and what happens there, they all shut down. They still shut down to an extent, even in a wetsuit. In a wetsuit, you're compressed. Your whole skin is compressed. So there's just nowhere for that blood to go. And what is essentially happening is, you know, you're squeezed anyway, and then your body wants to squeeze you a bit more, and that water comes out of your lungs. And this, actually, we talked about hydration briefly. And if you're overhydrated, yeah, I'm not saying, you know, some people overhydrate pre-swimming, pre an event. They're going to say, oh, I've got to get lots of water in me, lots of fluids or whatever. And that will exacerbate that effect as well. So, and some people are just more prone to it, I think. So the prevention is not overhydrating. That's, don't make yourself thirsty. Just drink when you're thirsty. Just drink normally before you start. And that is probably all you can do to prevent it. And in terms of treatment, there's not a lot you can do. What you do is get the swimmer out of the water, get the wetsuit off, because again, that squeeze, and that will probably help, because suddenly there's a whole load of other blood vessels, a whole volume buckets that you can pour all this fluid in, so that will help as well. And get them warm, make sure they're warm, because that causes you to vasodilate, and then wait for help to come, because the treatment is oxygen and diuretics and things like this. So there's not a lot you can really, you know, diuretics, they make you pee, so basically getting rid of that fluid. So there's not a lot you can do, not a lot I could do. Yeah, if I was presented with someone, I'd know what was happening, and so there's not a lot you can do except undress, warm up, dry up,
but
what I think is good to know is there's a review 3 or 4 years ago of this, and no fatalities from it. So you can rest assured that if you see someone, you don't have to panic. Just do some sensible things and call for help, and all will be well.
Yeah, I think it's also important to learn how to identify these things, because, you know, it can appear to look like a panic attack, can't it? So it's about, you know, learning about some of these signs to keep yourself.
Yeah, so it's a panic attack with frothiness in the mouth, basically, because I think it's really disturbing. You get this sort of tinged. It's not sputum actually, because it's kind of foam that comes up. Yeah, so it's air-filled foam, because it's not just water that's coming up. Yeah, it's all kinds of other stuff. So it is very disturbing. But if it looks like a panic attack but with foam, it's probably slightly reddish foam. It's probably a sight.
Call for help. Great, that's really useful. Thank you. So someone's also asked, and I think this is I mean, they've said an upper respiratory tract infection. I'm guessing they mean like a cold or something, but would you continue swimming if you've got a cold, or, you know, with or without a sinus infection or problem?
Again, this goes back to my thing, listen to your body. Personally, if I'm not too bad, I do swim, but I swim very short, you know, that's in and out. It's, you know, 2 minutes max. And because as David said, I'm addicted to it. You know, just be very, very careful. Again, you know, a cold or whatever is a stress on the immune system. You can put a bit more stress into the system, but not too much. It makes me I do feel better after, but just be really, really careful. And if you're really feeling crap, then it's probably not good. Again, know yourself. You know, think, don't use it as a treatment for for a cough or cold. But if you're feeling, don't use it as a treatment. Yeah, you can use it for treatment Crohn's or whatever, but don't use it as a treatment for that. But if you're desperate for your swim, you know, just keep yourself warm. Go in really warm. One of the other rules. Go in warm, come out, get warm, and don't stay in for more than a minute or two.
Yeah. And similar, actually, someone's well, not similar, is in terms of swimming with a known condition. We actually did a bit of work on this because Simon suffers with reynards. But someone's asking if there's specific scientific understanding of the effects of cold water on reynards, and whether there's short-term or long-term negative effects. I mean, some people say their reynards is alleviated with swimming, and other people say they really suffer as a result. So. Anything on reynards?
Right. Okay. First of all, there's no research, but this is a very common question, so I can talk speculatively about it a little bit. So so I've spoken to a lot of people with it. So it's only my own experience of speaking to a lot of people, really. But so what I've discovered, reynards itself, it's not actually in the hands as such. You know, the symptoms are all in the hands, but it's a systemic reaction. So putting your body into the water will set it off. So gloves really help. I think they really help me in the winter. You know, but they won't stop it. So do wear gloves. It's probably less painful if you do, but it won't stop it, because it's the reaction of your whole body to the stress on the whole body from the cold. In terms of whether it gets people better, I'd probably not. Overall, I'd say it has no effect on the symptom, long term. From speaking to people, it has no effect. And I know a lot of people with reynards who carry on swimming because they love it so much, and they haven't noticed it getting any worse. That's probably as much as I can. Much reassurance as I can give you. Maybe it'll get better, but it probably won't get worse. I suspect it won't get better.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing to remember is there's no shame in neoprene accessories. I mean, I wore gloves for the first winter ever last year, because they had always been sold out before. I always wanted gloves, and I finally got a pair, and it completely transformed. You know, those really cold swims, I could stay in a lot longer. So there's no shame in a pair of neoprene gloves.
Absolutely not. Again, what are you putting them on for? Or what are you not putting them on for? Because if you want that buzz, you don't get that buzz from your hands and feet. I'm a great fan of gloves and shoes, and I've spent many years working out what the best ones are, and I'm quite pleased with what I've got at the moment. And for me, you're not getting any additional effect. It's just painful, and I don't want pain. I don't like to wear them because I don't like the effect. It doesn't feel as good when you're swimming, but that's the only reason I don't. I have anything against it. But in terms of the comfort, that is just, they're way out there, so good. And in terms, if you want to feel those beneficial effects, utterly irrelevant whether you wear them or not.
Yeah, and actually, interestingly, someone's asked the question. I would like to go through winter without my socks and gloves, just skins. Any tips for post-swim recovery would be appreciated. I mean, I would ask yourself why.
Exactly. That would be.
If you're training for an ice mile, then you can't wear gloves and socks, and many swimming championships are the same. So, any thoughts?
So I don't know. As far as I know, there's nothing. It's just getting used to the pain. It's what it is. I don't. As far as I know, there is no way. There's no way of alleviating it. And it's an achievement to do it. It's not an achievement I am pursuing.
Excellent. That was about the after effects of swimming. Let's talk a little bit about after drop and what to do after swimming in cold water. Somebody's asked about dealing with after drop when it occurs about 20 minutes or so after a swim. So they've got out, they've got dressed, they've had the hot drink, they're feeling okay, and then 20 minutes or so later they're really not feeling great and they're in a dry and warm environment. Too long in the water?
Yes, I mean, that is the if you want the really short answer is yes, you've just been a bit too long in the water. It's a matter of staying in the water less time, and then okay, it was 20 minutes after therefore, well, how long was I in the water? You just need to be in the water less time. The thing is, the reason it comes back so late is because the cold from the outside has to conduct its way into the core, and that can take depending on different body shapes are very different, and that can take a long time for it to go, and so it comes a bit later. I tend to get after drop probably 5-10, it varies actually, sometimes 5-10 minutes afterwards, sometimes 15-20 minutes after. And I have worked out, I have no science behind this, but I have worked out how to, when I should be getting out. My brain tells me, right, now you should be getting out, and I can avoid after drop. Sometimes I think I'm enjoying myself too much. I'll go with it. But yeah, it's a slow process. It's not a surprise to have it 20 minutes afterwards, because the conduction from your fat is what your fat, your skin, your interstitial tissues can take quite a long time.
Yeah.
And being in a warm environment will definitely mitigate, dry and warm environment will definitely mitigate the effects. But it's not a surprise, and it's simply down to being in the water too long.
And can somebody change how their body reacts to the cold? So can you train yourself to react better?
To an extent, and I think this is where the adaptation comes in. And so in terms of how long you last in the cold, how long you last in the cold, I think it's very difficult to do. The only way to do that is put on weight. And this is why why elite swimmers. So Mike and the guys had to do a special separate experiment to see how long elite swimmers who've got virtually no body fat could stay. When they need, what temperature they needed wetsuits for open water swimming events, because they need them at a much higher rate than normal people. And so putting on weight is one way. A bit of Neoprene is one of the most effective ways. But but there's all the adaptation. What that gives you, it doesn't give you any time later. And I say I'm no better than I ever was. I'm really sure I can't stay in the water any longer than I used to. But what the adaptation does, it gives you breath control. So when you first go in, when you haven't swum before, you do that big breath, you hyperventilate, and that's why people tend to drown. Also, your blood pressure doesn't go up as much, and your blood pressure doesn't go up as much, your heart rate doesn't go up as much. So in these ways it reacts. And the most important one is the effect on breathing. And this is actually how they measure that adaptation 40 months later. They measure the effect on your breathing, your heart rate, your blood pressure when you go into water at a fixed temperature. So that part of you does adapt. But the actual tolerance to cold, I'm not aware of anything that beyond that, maybe beyond the first few months, your body reacts a bit quicker, I suppose. So maybe after my first 6 weeks of swimming, I improved over that period of time. But long term, I haven't come across anything that really improves your tolerance to cold. It's
we're all still human, right?
Yeah, and it's all physics.
Yeah. Okay. I know there's loads of questions in the chat. So I'm going to pass over to Simon. Perhaps you can pick out ones that haven't been answered or asked already, and you can ask away.
Yeah, actually, it's a lot of comments rather than questions. Someone said, thank you for mentioning Wim Hof, and that they always tell their friends to listen to their bodies. So picking up on that. Katia asked about how do you measure the adaptation, but you've just addressed that one. And someone's given a reference to a researcher in Norway who's looking at wetsuit fit and avoiding CP. So I'll make sure you get that at the end, Mark, if you want to follow up on that. And someone's said their reynards is better with swimming, but they need gloves and boots, otherwise they end up with chilblains and small ulcers. So yeah, cold water injury if they don't protect their extremities.
And I could add to that is, I would like to re-emphasize, and you're still getting all the benefits of the cold by doing that. So it's fantastic that it works and it's got better. It's really interesting to hear.
Yeah, and yes, someone else was talking about the gloves because it helps them get dressed quicker afterwards. So I think that's quite a good point. If you've got
very good point.
It's really hard to get dressed, and they also use battery or USB battery operated gloves for additional warmth. So someone else would like to know what gloves and boots you use because they're looking for a recommendation.
Okay, well with boots, I don't actually I don't go really hardcore with the boots. In fact, what I like is really light ones. I've used some of the Salomon Aqua shoes are quite nice. So they're actually like trainers. And they're really good for getting in and out of the water. I'm not sure they did them this year. But you can walk down. And what's fantastic about them is when you can go for, it depends where I am, but if I've got a bit of a walk somewhere, I can go for a walk, I can go and swim in the sea with them on, and then come straight out again. I don't have to worry about changing. It's one less thing to change. You're straight out, and that really helps. It's also, what I like is boots that drain quickly. I don't like the water getting stuck in them. So in the past I used, I think they were O'Neill summer windsurfing shoes because they drained really well. With gloves, then that's the opposite. I try and get as hardcore as I can. And the difficulty I've found is getting ones that don't let in the water. So you need to tend to go fairly small on these. I actually did a small experiment where I looked at a few different types of gloves and using a thermal camera, which was quite interesting. And the classic ones, it was can't remember which ones they were the best. But since then, anyway, I found the DHB. I think it's DHB. It's certainly a wiggle one, and they've got these gold, platinum, or whatever they're called, gloves. But they've got a strap around the wrist. Other straps around the wrist I found haven't worked, but these work really well. I think they're about 3 mil. With straps around the waist. They're relatively long cuffs. I think that really helps with the thing. But they're the expensive swimming gloves on wiggle, basically, the ones I've got.
Okay.
I'm happy to add that in. I'm happy to give specific recommendations.
Well, a few people have recommended zone 3 gloves and
zone
socks.
3, yeah, I think that was it. Yeah, I think there's a zone 3.
So there's no one from zone 3 here, so they've got a free mention from us there, or from our readers. So someone's asked a question here. They said they get Raynaud's symptoms, white fingers, if they do a short dip, but not if they do a longer swim where they swim properly.
That's my question.
Oh, that's Jonathan. That's someone. Yeah, that's someone called Jonathan.
Yeah, so last night I swam for like 5 minutes with some friends and got Reynards or got white fingers. This morning I did like an hour, so same water temperature, but hands are fine. Why would that be?
I couldn't give you a definitive answer for that, but there is a phenomenon which is I think it's called hunter's finger or something like that, and because it's noticed in the hunters. And what happens is initially they get cold, but then after a while, the hands actually the blood vessels in the hands open up again. You know, and maybe the body's saying, actually, I really need to get some circulation to the fingers at this point, and it's some kind of deep down reflex that happens after a while, and then they close up again. So that could be it. Look, I think it's called hunter's finger or hunter's hand or something like that. But that is a recognised phenomenon.
Okay. My thinking might be because if I'm just dipping, I'm not really swimming. But if I'm actually swimming, then there's going to be blood moving. I don't know. Yeah,
it could be that as well, and that just gets it going. That's another thing. I would expect to see it as a kind of a later effect, the hunters thing.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Someone's put in a recommendation here that if you have trouble getting your wetsuit socks on and off, to put doggy bags underneath them. Yeah, obviously someone else has then come up and asked to make sure they're empty ones.
Very sensible.
Tight fittings. Well, you would know about this one, Mark, surely. Tight fitting surgical gloves under your neoprene gloves work a treat. Have you ever tried that one?
I have, and I found it. I did try that, and I was very unimpressed. It didn't really work for me. To an extent, it kind of makes sense. I mean, it makes sense that it should work, but I haven't found that it's helped me at all. But definitely, what works, in terms of physics, it kind of makes sense. Because you want to get what you're aiming to do is just keep a still layer of, I suppose that's just insulation. It's just like putting fat on it or something, or keep a still layer. This is an interesting thing. What you need to do is keep a still layer either of water or air between you and the environment. That's why, in a way, some of the dry robes could be better. And I have recommended this to a couple of companies because they're actually quite airy, which is obviously great for, it makes them really cozy, and it's great for changing under, but actually it means that air can circulate, so you can get cold underneath. What you really want is a still layer of air, and that's a phenomenal insulator. That's what penguins use. Emperor penguins have these amazing coats of feathers. They can be out in those low temperatures because they just keep this absolutely still layer of air between the outside and the inside with all their feathers.
Okay, and there's another recommendation on hot water bottles for after you've got changed to snuggle up to a hot water bottle. Do you have any thoughts on using a hot water bottle to help yourself warm up?
Yes, I do, and make sure it's not very hot. That's the thing. It feels good, but the problem is it can burn. In fact, you see it. People use it for pain. So I do a lot of spinal surgery or anaesthetics to spinal surgery, and sometimes you see people, pain from nerve root pain is truly awful and nothing works for it. And you see people come in with these burn marks, and these are people who haven't just been in the cold, and these burn marks on their backs or wherever they've had the pain. And if it's too hot, particularly after you've been swimming, the problem is that your sensation isn't normal, and so you're not sure when you're burning. And the other thing is your blood's not circulating, so normally your blood would move that heat away and into the system. Whereas here, it's just staying there. So it's much easier to burn yourself. However, once the circulation is up and going, and if they're not too hot, they're so lukewarm, really, then they can be a great thing. I love putting my hands. Actually, even to this, even like in the operating theatre, it could be really cold. My hands can be really cold when I come out of an operating theatre for the ventilation system. Just putting them under a warm tap is just like one of the best things. And the reason for this is you've got a special kind of circulation in your fingers and hands. It's one of the reasons they're more painful, but also it can send stuff to the core quicker. But not too hot. That's the key message. And the same with showers and stuff like that. Really cold. You can put in a shower, but a warm shower, not a hot shower.
Okay. And then people are also talking about hot drinks, and I know that we've published some stuff that when you actually look at the physics of drinking a hot drink, it probably makes very little difference, but the sensation of having a hot drink is very comforting and
and this is it. And this is it. And this is why you get hot water sent to your core from the warm tap or a hot water bottle, and it's the same effect. So when you're having a hot drink, it's sending warmth into the core. So it feels really nice because your core is registering warmth, and that's what it needs. And again, the physics, as you say, are zero. So this is, I know people disagree with me on this, but I personally think, and let's face it, I have been going for coffee straight after my swim for 20 years now, and with no ill effects from it, and never seen anyone have an ill effect from it. But they say, well, that fools the body into thinking it's warm when it isn't, and you just vasodilate and collapse. But my experience is that that's not the case. So just do it because it feels nice, but don't do it in any expectation that it's going to warm you up in any way. Okay.
So I'm just scrolling through. Yeah, more people recommending the Zone 3 Heat Tech gloves. Zone 3 better do some advertising with us after this.
Get some free pairs as well. I'll test them and do my thermal camera experiments on them.
Okay. Someone else just suggests rinsing their hands, as you said, with warm water, like you described. Is there anything in the book on cold urticaria?
Urticaria. No, I might have in passing. So cold urticaria is a really interesting one, and it's something. It's kind of pretty much virtually anyone who can walk down to the sea and walk out, get in the water or whatever, get themselves into the water and get themselves out is basically fit enough to do cold water swimming. However, cold urticaria is probably the only real contraindication to it, because it's you have a kind of anaphylactic reaction to cold, and that so that can be really bad. And that's the one thing I'd say no. You get cold urticaria, I wouldn't do it, or you've got to do it in a super controlled environment. But I mean, it's a really difficult condition to live with and to treat.
Okay.
So they're varying degrees of it. They're varying degrees of cold urticaria, from the anaphylaxis to the not quite so bad, but that's one you've got to be really careful with.
Okay. And then someone says they have MS and something called cauda equina syndrome. That means lack of sensation. Well, you probably know what it means, but it means lack of sensation and nerve damage in their legs. They get electric shock feelings in their feet that can increase slightly after a cold water swim. I don't think there's any question here, but just a description. But I was just wondering, if someone has something like that, and they say the sensation increases after a cold water swim, is that something to be concerned about, or not?
Again, listen to your body. You've got to take it into account. If it starts getting worse, then cold water swimming is not for you. If it doesn't, I think overall something like that is not going to be damaging as such, because what's happening here is you're getting abnormal firing. I think they're slightly two different things here in a way, because MS is one thing and cauda equina is a condition which comes with many, there are many sort of causes of cauda equina syndrome. So getting that sensation in the foot, I mean, it's just the nerves firing off, which in itself is not causing any damage as far as I know. Yeah, if it's getting worse, well, yes, it probably is causing damage. MS is an interesting one. People with MS, warm environments, overheating really exacerbates MS. I've got a very good friend, one of my anaesthetic colleagues who's got MS, and he finds it fantastic. He started cold water swimming and finds it really helpful. I've met other people and spoken to other people with MS who do find it really helps that, and that's probably something to do with this, with the overheating kind of aspect of it as well.
Okay, we've got 3 minutes left, so the questions are still coming in. I'm just going to ask this one because this comes up quite a lot as well. Physical exercise after a cold swim. The question is about how can your psychology best adapt. I'm not quite sure whether that was meant.
Well, I'll talk about physical exercise.
Well, your physiology rather than your psychology. How do you adapt? Because you can get dizzy after a cold swim by doing exercise, and on the other hand, you can warm yourself up.
Overall, I think, well, dizziness. I always tend to. I go for a swim. I come out and swim. I cycle to the coffee place, and I find it great. I think, it's the best way to warm up. Heating yourself from the inside out is the best way. You're creating that heat gradient, so the heat is going out of the body. And what we're dealing with is heat gradients here. So I think exercise after a swim is generally a good thing. Exercise before a swim, so heating yourself up from the inside out, that is definitely the best way of heating up before you go for a swim. In fact, they've done studies where they show that if you do that, you cool slower if you exercise to warm up before a swim. But if you warm up from an external source, unless you're like totally warm the whole way through, like you would be with a sauna or something, then you actually cool quicker when you're going for a swim. Afterwards, I think it's generally, my experience is a fantastic thing in theory in terms of warming up. It's definitely the best thing. And actually, I have my coffee and then I cycle on to work. And it's only when I really start cycling in the cold days that I find I'm really properly warming up at that point. If you get dizzy, well, I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. Theoretically, you shouldn't be, but of course, that's your body, and you just need to listen to your body and see what you can do. Maybe start easily, start slowly with it, and then build it up. But in theory, exercise after a swim is just a good thing.
All right, we're out of time, so I'm going to hand back to Ella to round things up and to well, thank you from me. I'm sure Ella will have a more eloquent way of saying thank you.
No, thank you so much, Mark, and thank you everyone for coming. I hope we got through as many questions as we can. There was quite a few there, but I'm sure everyone's gone away and learned something. Aren't our bodies amazing?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's so interesting as well. Amazing and interesting.
Yeah, it's been really, really fascinating. And yeah, please do buy the book. And if you haven't got your magazine yet, or you think a friend would benefit, then get an extra copy, because the interview does a little bit more too. Our next guest will be Susanna Soberg, who's also a doctor and also a cold water swimmer. That will be our November guest. So if you want a little bit more on this in a different perspective, then please sign up to our next event in early November. And thank you again, Mark. Really, really great.
Absolute pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
Super. Good night, everyone. Thank you very much for coming.